Corinne began her animal welfare career as a volunteer with the MSPCA, where she's now the shelter operations coordinator. A detour to Hawaii allowed her the opportunity to work with the Maui Humane Society in many capacities, including coordinating volunteers, foster parents, a high-volume spay-neuter clinic, and community cat programs. Her absolute worst nightmare is one of her pets going missing, so reuniting lost cats with their owners is her passion. And she hopes her dog, cats, rats never wander off, and if they do, someone will be there with information, advice, and support. So Corinne, welcome. And
thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate being here. So like Stacy said, I'm Corinne. I am currently the operations coordinator at the MSPCA Boston Adoption Center. And I'm here to share with you the successes that we're having at our shelter in getting stray and found cats that come into our adoption center reunited with their owners. So like Stacy said, I really hope my pets never go missing. I think it's a really scary thing that we as the experts in our community can help people with. So I'm going to get going. So I've kind of broken this down into 10 simple steps that we're taking that I want to share with you about how your organization can try to improve your return to home rate. Throughout the presentation, I'm going to kind of stop for a few case studies, some examples, some of my favorite stories of people we've helped get their pets back over the years. And then I want to leave plenty of time at the end for questions and answers. So before we kind of at the beginning of this, I want to talk about some terms, some words, some phrases we use in the animal welfare world, and sort of historically how we've always defined these terms. So I'm going to talk a lot about stray cats. That's the term that we use in the adoption center for a cat that comes into us that is basically not an owner surrender. And so I think historically in the field, maybe we've defined this term as an unwanted cat, an unloved cat without a home, a street cat, a homeless cat, a community cat, something like that. We also hear the word abandoned sometimes or dumped. And I think that this comes with a connotation of, you know, sort of that like people willingly abandon or dump animals. They leave cats behind when they move. They are dumping them off at known feral feeding colonies. And then what a responsible owner is and does. And I think that, you know, maybe historically we've always felt like if someone loses their pet, there are certain things that we expect of a responsible pet owner from our point of view in the animal shelter world. And then reclaim or return to home is really a pretty unlikely outcome for a stray cat in our shelter. And so when we've been looking at these terms and using these terms with these types of definitions, historically we've seen this result, which is that 2020, so really recent data just from last year from Animal Shelters Count statistics, show that 5% of stray cats that end up in animal shelters are ever returned to their owners. The previous stats I had were from a 2017 study by the University of Queensland and Missing Animal Response Organization that showed a rate of about 3%. So maybe in the animal welfare world, maybe we didn't know this stat, but we knew anecdotally that cats being reclaimed or returned to home to their owners after they'd end up in our adoption center was pretty low. So it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? You know, we know that in animal welfare, we're often overwhelmed and understaffed. And every day we are making like a million informed micro decisions about where it is most important to put our time and energy to get the most return on our limited resources. And so I think historically, we've always known that stray cats have not been one of those areas that we're going to see a big return on our resources, so they don't get a lot of our attention. So one of the things that kind of the main takeaway that I want to have for this conversation is let's rewrite this narrative. Let's go back to basics and really rethink what we're talking about here. So I want to redefine these terms. I think we're still using these terms, but let's try to look at it with fresh eyes and come into it with a sort of a judgment-free process. So when I say stray cat, all I can really say is this is a cat whose history is currently unknown to us. We have no idea. They can't talk to us. So there are some things maybe we do know: who brought the cat to us, where they said it was found, its description, is it spayed or neutered, does it have a microchip? but we don't know the story of this cat. And then as far as this abandoned and dump terms, I would really ask us as an animal welfare profession to really think and consider carefully when we're using these terms, because honestly, unless we saw it or we have a really reliable narrator, we actually don't necessarily know that this is the case. You know, unless, you know, the animal was left in a carrier in our facility, I would consider that abandoned, but I might also consider that we don't know that it was the owner who abandoned that pet. It could be a disgruntled neighbor situation. It could be a domestic situation. It could be a good Samaritan who didn't know what to do or didn't want to interact with us for some reason. So unless we know or saw something happen ourselves, we actually can't really use these terms accurately. Another thing I think it's worth mentioning with abandoned, I know I hear a lot of folks saying, the people next door moved out and they abandoned this cat when they moved out. I would say statistically, a lot of pets go missing when people move. It's a time of a lot of stress, a lot of transition, a lot of in and out of the house, and it's a really ripe time for pets to get lost. And then the responsible owner. And so here, if you could see me, I'm using air quotes around responsible. And I think that it's important to understand that compassion fatigue sets on really early in the process of looking for a lost pet. That people who lose their pet don't often get a lot of support from their immediate circles and from people in their community. They may have barriers such as a language barrier, internet access, physical barriers, and also people just don't know what to do. They have no idea. Even the people who, we might think are kind of our A+ gold standard, the best adopter you could ever think of to adopt the animals from your organization, they don't know what to do when their pet gets lost. And then that reclaim or return to home is actually the exciting result of just a little bit of work to help reunite pets with their people. And so I think we all know in animal welfare that a story and a narrative sells. So, you get a lot of likes and shares and comments on kind of the sad sack cat who was quote dumped or showed up really skinny and covered in fleas. And I think it's okay for us to work those narratives when they are true. But I would really encourage us to consider what kind of information we're putting out there when we don't actually know that that's the truth. So what might change if we really flip the script on how we approach stray cats that come into our adoption centers and our rescues and our shelters? And so, what I'm here is basically to show you what that did for us. And so a few years ago, we decided to really lead with what is a scary idea, which is that we don't know everything, believe it or not. I can admit that I don't know everything. We don't know everything. All we know is that the cat is here with us. We are the professionals and the animal experts in our community, and we have a job to make a reasonable attempt to try to find this animal's home. And I would say even more than that, to presume that they have a loving home who wants them back, and vice versa. So while what I'm giving you here is kind of some practical advice on what we do, I think the biggest advice I can give today is that changing the mindset of your organization to move forward with that presumption that every cat has an owner until you're proven otherwise, it is really the biggest change overall that you can make. All the other stuff is really just logistics, and you can figure out what does and doesn't work for your organization. You may have different or better ideas about what will be successful, but it all really starts here with a positive outlook. So when we decided to make some changes and update and codify our stray hole policies a couple years ago, our results for 2020 were this. So our reclaim rate for stray cats that end up in our shelters is 36%. So essentially 7 times what the national average data is. And I would say that, I don't know this for sure, but I would guess that we have overall a maybe kind of more challenging stray population than maybe some other spots. I'm at the MSPCA Boston, where we have the Angel Animal Medical Center attached to us. So we have a pretty high visibility shelter in a busy city area with a 24-hour emergency animal hospital attached. So we get a pretty high incidence of medical cases, strays that are coming in because they were found really seriously ill or injured, strays that are from pretty far away. While most of our strays do come from the greater Boston area, again, because Angel Animal Medical Center is open 24/7, we do see a fair amount of cats just from further flung locales than I think we would otherwise. So overall, 36% is something we're really, really super proud of. So the place we're really going to start is like you get out what you put into the process. So just like you would have protocols for your vaccines and your intake and your behavior evaluations, really you should have a protocol for stray cats coming into your shelter. So certainly first and foremost, we want to scan for microchips, and we're going to delve a little bit deeper into microchips a little bit further in the presentation, but I just wanted to touch on that here. We are looking at our internal lost and found system. So, folks can report lost and found pets to us. So when we have a stray cat come in, we're looking for a match for that. When we take lost and found pet reports from people, one of the things we're really hammering home is that we really need a photo. That helps eliminate any kind of guessing game on our part when we are searching our lost report. So we really make sure that we get photos from people. All those brown tabby cats all look alike. So if we can be looking at photos and knowing when it doesn't make sense to contact people as a possible match, that's a real big time saver and helper on our end. We work a lot with our local partners. So for us at the MSPCA in Boston, we have a really great working relationship with the Animal Rescue League of Boston and Boston Animal Control, and the three of our organizations are in contact constantly about our lost and found and stray pets. And then certainly when we get cats from other areas, we're reaching out to those shelters and animal control officers there as well. And it's been a really great way to build a relationship with some of those other organizations and animal control officers, which has just come in handy and useful overall, I think, to all of us to have a contact and have someone to reach out to in a place where maybe we wouldn't have had that relationship otherwise. And then we want to make sure that we're getting a good photo to post online. So for us at the MSPCA, we have a dedicated Facebook page, which is MSPCA Lost and Found Pets, where all of the stray animals that come into our adoption center are posted. And then thanks to the goodness and hard work of a lot of folks at home on social media, those are then getting shared to the more local and more pertinent, lost and found animals of Brookline or lost and found animals of Framingham, where they're more likely to be seen by someone who actually knows that pet. And so, if having this many steps for each stray cat comes in sounds daunting, I'm really just here to reassure you that it is really doable. And if you, have this protocol in place and you know exactly what to do and who's good at doing it, it's really only taking a few minutes for each cat. We every year have between 400 and 500 cats come in as stray to our adoption center. 2019, we had about 425, and it really takes no more than a few minutes. To be honest, the most time-consuming part of the whole process is usually getting a decent photo. So just like an adoption, for a stray photo, I'm not worrying so much about how cute they look for adoptability. Certainly that's one of the things, that we touched upon in a previous presentation, that a good photo is really upping your chances of getting adoption interest. What I just want is a good, clear photo to try to find the owner of this pet. It's forward facing, it's showing their markings pretty well. And so, the thing that's most time consuming is that for every photo like this of a nice, really easy to photograph cat who's just sitting there being very compliant, you're going to end up on your phone with 25 bleps and boops and butts and bad attitudes. So I really say a blurry photo is or a less than ideal photo is better than no photo at all. But I'll also, of course, take everything on a case-by-case basis. And if a cat had a really tough intake or is really stressed out, it's probably worth it for your and their stress level to maybe wait a little bit or to the next morning. But generally getting all of these balls rolling ASAP upon arrival is a good idea to get the process moving. So one thing that we want to do is make info gathering up top part of our process. And I saw another similar form in one of the presentations this morning that I'm definitely going to go back and look because I really like a lot of their ideas. But we had a similar thing that we came up with a few years ago, which is we have the stray cat form that we have asked folks to fill out when they come in so that we have as much information as possible. So I'm going to highlight a few things here. So one of the things is, do you or anyone currently provide food? This is often a good entry point to having conversations about TNR or asking them to talk to their neighbors who may feed or care for the cat or know more about the cat's history. And like if this cat can go back to where it came from. Is the cat friendly? Understanding how the cat acts in the world and an environment they're comfortable in can help us make more informed decisions for cats who have challenging behavior in the shelter. Did they bring the cat into their home, and did they provide it with a litter box? How were those habits? Are there anything that we should know about? And then some questions about, had they seen it interact with children or other pets? Another question that we'll ask is, are they interested in adopting? So often at the time that the folks bring this cat in, they might feel an attachment to that animal. And so we can really address this up front to say, should this cat become available for adoption? Are you interested in kind of having like first right of refusal? And that helps us at this, intake time, have a conversation about what our adoption process looks like, what the fees are, and that we would want them to be making preparations now so that if we did call them to say that the cat is going to be available for adoption, they're ready to go. I think what we found historically was that if we just sort of had a casual conversation and someone said, yes, if the cat's available for adoption, let me know, then we'd call them, then they'd have to call us back, we'd play phone tag, then they'd say, can I think about it for 2 days? And this really sets the expectation that, if you think you want this cat, be ready to say yes when we do call you, so we're not increasing the length of stay of cats in the shelter unnecessarily. And then we're also asking, again, about TNR options. So having a conversation about why this cat would be a good candidate for TNR, how they can help, and getting a little better understanding of the area about whether it's safe and appropriate. And so this paperwork stays with the cat as kind of a defunct surrender profile. We're also really using social media to our advantage. So this is kind of a screenshot of what our Lost and Found Facebook page looks like. And again, I think it's really important to post consistently. So we have kind of a blurb that we use the same text every single time. We want to give people enough information to be helpful to them and not a burden on you. I think historically, sometimes in our field or with, cat people in the community, there's an idea that you should withhold some information so that people can, quote, prove that it's their pet. I've been doing this for many years and have done a ton of pet reclaims, and I can tell you I've never once had someone come forward and had a feeling or an idea or a thought that this person was nefariously trying to pretend that this was their pet. I've never, ever, ever once had that feeling or any proof of that otherwise. And what I found is when we would withheld information such as the sex or the spay-neuter status of the cat or where the cat was found, all that did was put a burden on us to answer questions that if we put the information out there for the community, people could self-select out and they could see that, this is a female cat, their cat is male, this is a neutered cat, their cat was intact. And it really, it put a burden on us to answer questions that if we just put the information out there that folks could reach out if they thought it was necessary, but they could self-select out if they could understand that it wasn't their pet. We want to not delay. We want to get this information out on social media as soon as possible so it can be seen and shared. Our stray hold time is relatively short, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But in order to be fair to a potential owner, they need as much time as possible to find that post and come forward to reclaim their pet. And then monitoring the comments. Now you might see on this post, I say that, it says something like, it's difficult for us to monitor the comments on these photos in a timely manner, so please contact the shelter directly, which is true. And we really want people to do that. But I will say that, every once in a while, there is a helpful comment in the section. And it's usually not from the owner. It might be from a neighbor or someone who knows the owner who's trying to reach out. So I do think it's important to still monitor those things. And in those situations, we can respond to that person and ask them to call us or to private message us so we can take that conversation offline. So getting more out of microchips. So petmicrochiplookup.org, I hope that all of us are using this as a tool. So I'm sure that we're all pretty familiar with, if you scan a pet for a chip and it has a 985, it's a home again chip. And if it starts with an O and an asterisk, it's an AVID chip. So I think we're probably good at identifying the manufacturer of the microchip, but we want to make sure that we are contacting the registry where the chip was most recently updated, which isn't necessarily the manufacturer of the chip. So this is why petmicrochiplookup.org is really great. We can put the microchip number in the search bar here, and it's going to give us the organization that the chip was most recently updated with, and certainly some other options if they think we should call other places. But this is a really great tool so we don't have to play a guessing game. And when I call to get information on a chip, I'm making sure I get all the information at once so I don't feel like I have to call back if I have further questions. So I'm getting, of course, the owner's name, address, phone number, secondary phone numbers, email address, and the implant facility. And then right away, we're getting on the horn. So I'm going to call. If I don't get that person on the phone right away, of course, I'm going to leave a voicemail. And then I'm also going to text the number. I'm going to email the email address. I'm going to call the emergency contacts. And then basically, if that doesn't pan out pretty soon, I'm going to reach out to the implant facility, because we've had some success with, you know, maybe the person hasn't updated their information on the chip, but they've interacted with that organization more recently and they have a more recent update. Contact information for them. And then another thing that we are, oops, sorry, it wasn't, there we go. And then, you know, one other thing that we've had a lot of success with is if all those things are a dead end, can we do a little internet sleuthing to try to find this person? And I'll give you some examples of that as we go through, but, you know, can we use Google or search on Facebook to find the people? Now, if the owner name on the chip is John Sullivan, that's probably going to be pretty hard for you to, you know, make contact with that person. But if it's a more unique name, we've definitely had success, you know, Googling people and finding their work email address, contacting them that way, finding them on Facebook, messaging them that way. And then I just thought it was kind of interesting, some of our microchip statistics. So in 2019, 53% of the stray cats who came into our shelter had a microchip. Of those, only 70% were registered with up-to-date contact information. So not too shabby, but still a good chunk of cats there that had a chip, but that, you know, were a dead end. And then I think it's worth noting that, you know, if we only relied on working microchips as our method of reunification, our reclaim rate drops to 12%, which again is not too shabby. It's like 2.5 times the national average. But certainly could be way better. And I think just the additional efforts we're putting in really bump that number up of the amount of cats we're getting back to their people on a regular basis. So this is Kitty and Jim. And so Kitty was a cat who was brought into our adoption center after being found outside. We scanned her for a microchip. She had one. Yay. We called to get the information on the microchip, and we called the number and it was disconnected. Boo. I'm sure we've all been there. So we did all the things I previously talked about. We texted, we emailed, we looked at the address. The address wasn't really anywhere near where the cat was found, so that's a challenge. But the person's name on the microchip was relatively unique. So I did a little Facebook sleuthing and was able to find someone who seemed like it was probably the same person, and just sent them a Facebook message and said, hey, you know, this is the MSPCA. We have this cat with a microchip that's registered to you. You know, is it your cat? What can you tell us? And the person got back to us right away, was super helpful. And they had moved out of state several years before and had rehomed their cat to a neighbor at the time. And that person was this gentleman, Jim. And Jim has a physical disability. He lives at home. He's not a very internet savvy type fellow. So his cat had been missing for several days and he just had no idea what to do. He also didn't even know that Kitty had a microchip because he had, you know, gotten him from the neighbors, and that just wasn't part of their conversation. But the original owner was able to give us contact information for Jim. So when we called him out of the blue to say, we have your cat, he was just absolutely beside himself. He was so excited. He was so appreciative that we did that little bit of work to reach out and connect with him. And because of Jim's little bit unique situation, we went out and returned the cat to him physically to his home. And it turned out Jim's roommate had a intact cat that they lived with, so we were able to get that cat happily signed up for our spay-neuter program too. So that was just sort of a happy accident of a win-win. But I mean, that whole process of Googling that person, finding them on Facebook, connecting with them, maybe took like 6 minutes. So, you know, not a lot of time out of our day, and a really, really appreciated and happy reunion for this cat and their really, really happy owner. So this is, I think, kind of like the next frontier of what we're trying to do, which is like, how do we use the resources that we have to go grassroots? So do we have the resources to send someone from our team to knock on the door, you know, look at the address on the chip and go knock on the door. One story I always think of when we talk about this is we had a cat come in who had a chip. According to her chip, her name was Princess. The cat came in cardiac arrest and severe respiratory distress. And so, I mean, ultimately, sadly, unfortunately, shortly after intake, our vets suggested humane euthanasia because she was in a really rough place and wasn't going to make it. But the cat had a chip. And we of course felt like we wanted the owner to have some sort of closure. If anyone's familiar with the Boston area, the cat was found in Roslindale, which is a neighborhood of Boston to the south, but the chip information was from Dorchester. And so as far as Boston goes, those places are pretty far apart. So we were a little bit confused about how that would have happened, but honestly presumed that the person had probably moved and not updated their chip information. But since the only info we had to go off of was that Dorchester address, we had someone go out and knock on the door. And the woman who answered had indeed still lived there, and indeed was missing her cat Princess. She'd been missing for about 2 months. And so she was really sad to know that the outcome for Princess was that she didn't make it, but was so appreciative to have that closure and to know what had happened to her. Unfortunately, no one will ever know how Princess got from Dorchester to Roslindale. You know, that's a tale that we wish we could know. But, you know, it's one of those examples that I think that the not knowing is a lot harder, and we were able to just put a little bit of effort and provide some closure to that person in that situation. If you're building those relationships and have that great teamwork with the animal control officers in your community, could they do this for you while they're out on their calls? Can they go by and knock on the door? Can they leave a door hanger and do something similar? Can you ask the finder to do the same thing? And especially one thing that we're working on is sending the finder home with flyers. So they're posting them in the neighborhood where the cat was found so that they can let them know that the cat is at the adoption center to get in touch with us. Or we're also working on building a team of volunteers who can do this if the finder can't or won't. So just getting the word out there, you know, for folks that maybe aren't on social media, to put the word directly in the community where the cat was found that the cat is at the adoption center. And then we just want to really offer support tools to owners of lost pets and finders of found pets. So if you go to our website, which is mspca.org/lost, we have a really robust section about what to do if your pet is lost or found. We have an online form that people can fill out for lost or found pets. And what's really nice about that is when they fill out that form, they get an autoresponder in the form of this email, which really just reiterates all of the information that's on our webpage. So I think this is really important to me, you know, when someone's pet is lost off shelter hours, that they still are feeling heard and that they're getting a response that has information that's useful to them. We share, I'm hoping all of you have seen Front Street Animal Shelter in Sacramento release some really excellent YouTube videos of what to do when you've lost a cat or dog, and they're also available in Spanish. I recommend these to people all the time. They're about 6 to 7 minutes, and they really comprehensively break down step by step what folks should do in a way that I think is very digestible and reasonable for people to understand. We give them contact information for Boston Animal Control and other shelters and recommend that they contact their local animal control. And then we also talk to them about, you know, making sure that if your pet is microchipped, that you're figuring out how to get that information up to date. And then that email, we're also acknowledging really kind of making sure they send us a photo. Part of the form they fill out, they can upload a photo there. But if they don't, that email reminds them how important a photo is to our process. We offer to folks that we can make and print out flyers for them. So, you know, I think a lot of people don't have printers at home or access to a printer. So we're happy to create a flyer and print it out for them so that they can pick it up and flyer themselves. You know, we just want to have a really simple, bold heading. Is it a lost or found pet? A really good photo of the pet, a basic description of the pet and like when and where it was lost or found, and contact information and to how to get in touch with either the shelter or the owner of the pet. We're going to encourage them to, sorry about that. Oh, microchip registration counseling. We did that. We rent traps. So we have traps available for rental that people get their deposit back when they return it. And we, you know, give them tools and support as to how to best use the trap. And then we kind of give them, talk them through things they should do. They want to talk to their neighbors. They want to ask to search their properties physically, searching at night with a flashlight so that they're seeing their eyes. We also want to make sure that they don't wait to report. I talk to a lot of people who feel kind of silly when they call me that their pet's only been missing a day or an hour or 4 hours. And I always really make them feel that they're doing the right thing by reporting their lost pet. The longer they wait, the harder it's going to be to connect them. And then I always tell them, that I'm happy to hear from you an hour from now if you found your pet. That's something that we don't mind at all. We're happy to get the happy news, and we're happy to help you as soon as your pet goes missing, because that's the best way to get started. Us here in Eastern Massachusetts, we're definitely, excuse me, seeing an uptick in coyotes. And I think that compassion fatigue, this is kind of one of those places I really see it settle in first and foremost, is people think the pet got hit by a car or it was taken by a coyote, which is certainly possible. But I really try to, encourage people that it's much more likely that your cat is scared, hiding somewhere. If your cat is very outgoing and friendly, that someone picked them up and brought them home and are waiting for some sign from you that you are missing your pet. But I don't know if other people experience this, but kind of immediately I hear people, sort of their desperation and fatigue goes right to that something bad happened. And that really hinders their ability to keep positive and keep searching, where they might be more likely to have a positive outcome. And that's really where just this moral support comes in. And I want to be clear, we're a shelter that takes in 400 or 500 stray cats. I take many more than that lost reports. And it doesn't mean that I'm spending all day, every day, on the phone with folks. It's just, you get those folks who are clearly going to see it through to the end and really just need a little bit of moral support. And that might be just like once a week or so, just kind of shooting an email saying like, hey, have you had any news? I'm thinking about you. We're certainly keeping an eye out for them. And this is a cat, one of the cutest cats I've ever seen in my whole life. And his name is Soda Pop. And he was lost. Family had adopted him and he got lost. And it just was clear that like they were gonna work, they were gonna see it through, they were gonna try to find him. They rented a trap from us. And this family set that trap every night for 45 nights. They caught possums, they caught other people's cats, they caught skunks, they caught raccoons. And she had said it was literally the 45th night, and she said, this is it. This is the last time I'm doing this. I can't do it anymore. We're the hope that we have in the morning when it's dashed every morning, my kids are really upset. I'm going to do it one more time, and then we have to return the trap, and we have to, figure that he's never coming home, and we're moving on. And on that 45th night, they went out and Soda Pop was in the trap, which is just really incredible to me. There's another family that I worked with who had been going out 27 days every single night, searching, calling, talking to their neighbors, flyers. And on the 27th day, she heard a little mew in the basement window of a neighbor that they had already searched, that they had already looked in. And it took that cat 27 days of being trapped in that basement. Thankfully, she survived. She was very dehydrated. She was very undernourished. But 27 days later, she was out that night and heard that cat meowing in the basement, finally to be let out. So, and then for finder support, we're really doing all these things in reverse. We're going to check lost reports. We're going to give them information of other shelters and animal controls to contact. We're going to make flyers for them. We're going to offer to scan for a microchip, and we're going to facilitate communication as necessary between them and an owner. And then, we really want to use data to look at our stray hold policy. I don't know what it's like in other parts of the world. In Massachusetts, pretty much every town has its own stray hold policy for dogs, which is pretty much 7 days across the board. But cats don't have that. So it's really up to each individual organization to set their stray hold policy. And I think historically, our stray hold policy had a lot of gray area and room for interpretation. And I think that this could lead to some kind of what I would call like profiling of cats and owners, without acknowledging that people from all different towns and neighborhoods love their animals and should have the same right and opportunity to reclaim their pets. It also didn't give us a very good place to start in the event that a cat had been adopted out or euthanized before an owner came forward. So previously, like I said, our stray hold policy had a lot of gray areas. We kind of said like between 5 to 7 days for cats with signs of ownership, and like 10 days for cats with microchips. And so what I thought is, like, we have data on this, so let's look at this and use the data to set our stray hold policies. So what we found with the data is that if a cat is going to be reclaimed from us, the average time from intake to contact with the owner is 2 days. And basically after that 2 days, that rate just basically falls off the map. So, you know, in order to balance trying to get these cats back to their owners with a length of stay in the shelter, we really felt like we didn't need to keep them that much longer than 2 days. And actually, that 2-day rate, if you remove the 3 longest kind of reclaim stays, you know, the situation that we'll talk about in a minute where the cat did end up staying with us for a quite long time before the owner came forward or before we were able to make that connection, it actually drops to 0 days. So if you kind of remove those outliers from the scenario, it's really 0 days. So what we did is that we now hold animals with signs of ownership for 5 days and those without signs of ownership for 3 days, which, you know, I think if I didn't have the data to look at, I would feel like felt a little bit short, but it's very clear that the data shows that 2 days is more than enough for us to make contact or hear from that owner. So this is a cat, this is an example. This cat is named Blackie. He was with us for 3 weeks before an owner came forward. And so, you know, I think under normal circumstances, you know, a cat being with us for 3 weeks would be a pretty long length of stay. The reason he wasn't already adopted out was that he'd come in, you can see his intake photo. He doesn't look super great. Obviously his eyes are crusty. He's a little bit matted for kind of a long-haired cat. He tested positive for FIV, which is of course fine. We adopt out and place FIV positive cats. Basically, he was just, he was really challenging behaviorally. He was really shut down. He was a little bit forwardly aggressive, and he had this URI. And so he was just this cat that was in limbo for us for a while, trying to figure out, like, treat his URI, trying to find alternate places for him to try to, you know, improve his socialization and behavior, if we could see what we could get out of him. So it was 3 weeks before he was still with us, and we got a message from an owner who had not really realized that, you know, stray and lost cats got posted on social media, and she was really crying to one of her friends about her lost cat, and the friend said, the MSPCA, which is right down the street, has a, you know, a page, let's look. And she looked and she saw him. And so, you know, the owner of Blackie is, I think, one of those folks who is the perfect example of that we need to understand where people are coming from when we don't hear from them for a while about their lost pets, and what a quote unquote responsible owner does and doesn't do. And so his owner is a lovely young woman. She's the only English speaker in her family. She has a disability that makes it difficult for her to interact in person. And we heard from her, and, you know, based on how she described the cat, that he's so friendly and she loved him so much, we were like, doesn't sound like the cat we have at the shelter, but we're so glad he's great with you. So we were able to get her to come in person, and he was immediately a different cat. I mean, he saw her and he started rolling around in his cage, headbutting her, you know, rubbing up against her. So, you know, clearly this cat needs to go home with her. And it was a really great connection for us because she and her family now use the MSPCA as a resource for him. She contacts me regularly. I probably hear from her about once a week, how great he's doing, if they need some food, if she might, you know, if his URI is flaring up, can she get some meds? So this was a cat and a person that was really important for us to connect with anyway. And this is the way that we were able to do that. So a lot of the cats that we have coming in as strays can sometimes be the friendliest cats in our shelters. And I'm sure a lot of us who are working in sheltering in New England know that we're dealing with a smaller cat population with more challenging medical or behavioral issues. And sometimes, you know, while we have a high demand for adoption, the pool of friendly, healthy cats can be pretty small. So one thing we decided, you know, it used to be that the stray cats, or the cats that weren't available, had to be sort of hidden away in the back, and no one from the public could possibly look at them, touch them, even know they existed. And we realized that, you know, that doesn't necessarily need to be the case. We have cats that need those behind the scenes spaces for medical or behavioral things. And that if we could use our adoption floor for our stray holds, for our forwardly friendly, healthy cats, there's really no reason we can't do that. And what that's also doing is allowing those cats to meet people who could potentially be adopters if these cats end up going up for adoption. So what we do is, you know, we have a situation like this where this cat is on a stray hold, but we make it very clear that, you know, if someone might be interested, the date that she's available. So they can talk to our, obviously this is kind of pre-COVID times, things have changed a little bit with appointment-based adoptions, but, you know, they can talk to the staff, so the staff can tell what we know about her. And then this frees up space for, you know, more challenging long-term cats. If the people decide to adopt her once her stray hold is up, she can go home that same day, and we're not drawing out that adoption time frame. And it also sets expectations of adopting a cat with a stray background right up front. And so this is something we really felt like we needed to address to avoid future issues pre-adoption. So when someone inquires about adopting a cat that comes to us with a stray history, this is a screenshot of kind of a, you know, we don't read this outright, but kind of a script or an idea that we want staff to go over with the potential adopter, which is that, you know, this cat was brought to us as a stray. We've done our due diligence, searching for an owner. But it is possible that a rightful owner could come forward after you've taken the cat home. This happens in about 1% of cases, so it's a small percent, but it does happen. So, you know, if we take in 400 or 500 stray cats a year, that's 4 or 5 times a year that a cat has gone home for adoption, and then an owner who can prove that their owner does come forward. So we just want to prepare you for the possibility. So what we're saying is, you know, if an owner comes forward, we're going to contact you to arrange the return of the cat. Is that something you're okay with agreeing with? And then we're just gauging their reaction. So if the person says like, oh man, that would really stink, like that would be really hard, but like I understand why you would do that, we're like, great, let's move forward. And if the person has some kind of reaction that is like, that's ridiculous, those people don't deserve to have that cat back, I would never return it, that's their prerogative to have that reaction. But what we're going to say is like, I can understand that that would be really hard. Why don't we make a point to find you a cat that doesn't have a stray history, so that that just isn't even a possibility. And so one of the reasons that we decided to do this, and we changed, this is our adoption agreement. And so now this says here, you know, many animals are received by the MSPCA as adoption center as strays. On occasion, a person may provide evidence that they are the rightful owner of this animal after the animal has been placed in a new home. I understand that should this situation arise, I will return the animal I adopted. Historically, our messaging on that wasn't quite as clear. Historically, our messaging says, if someone comes forward, we may contact you about possibly returning the pet. And again, when that happens 3 or 4 or 5 times a year, it put everyone in a really sticky place, and it never felt great on either end. Of course, no one loves calling an adopter to tell them that they need to return their pet, but I think what always felt worse was that, you know, someone's pet who they've had for months or years wasn't potentially going to be returned to them, and no one felt good about that. And, you know, I think, again, when I talk to people, sometimes they have questions or concerns about why should a pet, you know, go back to someone who, in their opinion, wasn't looking for them or wasn't doing quote unquote the right things. And this cat, Tan France, is a perfect example of that. And I will say that overwhelmingly, when we have situations where an owner hasn't come forward for a long time, and usually it's never more than a few weeks, we're talking 2 weeks, 3 weeks, it's almost always some kind of extenuating circumstance that is really out of the owner's control. So this was Tan France. He came in, he was a young intact male. He had a 3-day stray hold. He was adopted the same day he was available, because obviously he's adorable. And 2 weeks after he was adopted, we got a message from an owner who was clearly this cat's owner. Clearly, you know, he belonged to her. And the situation was she was hospitalized, and a family member was supposed to be caring for her cat. And the whole time she was in the hospital, just kept saying, yep, the cat's fine. Yep, he's fine. He's doing fine. He's doing fine. And when she finally came home and was discharged from the hospital, turns out the cat had been lost. So she immediately got to work, you know, walking the neighborhood, talking to the neighbors, putting up flyers. and actually talked to the neighbor a few streets over who had found him and brought him in. So that was the way that she was able to connect with us. But I would say overwhelmingly, when we have those situations where an owner doesn't come forward for a longer period of time than you would maybe like, it is very often that the person is hospitalized, the person is on vacation, the person is in some sort of facility, and the family member or pet sitter or neighbor or friend who is supposed to be caring for the pet lost the pet and didn't do their due diligence to let the owner know and move forward with that information. So I think setting that expectation up front has really helped with those rare instances where that's happened. And the adopters are really, honestly, very gracious about it. And then, of course, that's an adopter that we're going to want to make sure we make them happy and try to find a really good fit and handpick a great cat for them in the future. So just to kind of reiterate, one, we want to rethink that narrative. Let's go back to the source and realize that we don't know everything, and that we have to just take the information we have and move forward with it, and consider that we are the experts in our community and that people are looking to us to go the extra mile to make sure that these pets get back home. That we're going to get out what we put in. Collecting information up front is going to make our jobs easier when we're trying to figure out outcomes for these cats. So we're going to gather lots of information. Social media is really big for us. I'm sure it's big for everything that we do, but those shares that we get on those found pets are really often the things that get them home. We want to make sure we're, not leaving anything on the table in regards to microchips. So using texting options, emailing, getting information from the implant facility, Googling, Facebooking people, looking at the information, the resources that we have to actually go out in the community and try to find folks when we have information about, addresses or names. Offering tools and support to people who lost and found pets. And I want to be clear, based on our just the communication or the information generally here today, that when people reach out to us having found a cat, our first response isn't bring it to the shelter. Our first response is, great, if they come to the shelter, they're much less likely to get home than if they stay where they are. So do you want to bring it in to get scanned for a microchip? Can we make you flyers to post? Can you talk to your neighbors? Can you go on Nextdoor? And then, then if they've exhausted those options and it seems like the cat doesn't have a caretaker, then we're recommending if they would like to bring the cat in. But, we're certainly not encouraging people to bring found cats to the adoption center. But when they are with us, this is kind of our process and what we're doing. Really, using our data. I know for myself, I think a lot of us think from the heart, which is great in a lot of situations, but, we should have hard data that can help us manage what our policies are, that we can reconsider how we use spaces in our adoption centers or, how we utilize our resources as a rescue with foster homes, that we don't have to hide these cats that are on their stray holds behind closed doors, and that we can actually shorten lengths of stay by putting them out with the public and talking to people honestly about it. And then in that talking to people honestly about it, getting folks who adopt a cat that has a straight history to understand that there is a possibility that they have an owner out there that would come forward, and that the right thing to do is to get them back to their owner. Just a few additional things, things that we're working on adding to our repertoire and things that I think can work sometimes. When we take lost and found reports, we're just getting information up front to share contact information. So one thing I was finding is I'd get a lost report and then I'd get a found report and they possibly matched, but I didn't have permission to share the owner's information and I didn't have permission to share the finder's information. So with all of our lost and found reporting, we just make sure up front that we have permission to share your information. Which leads to this. So, can we help facilitate reunification even when the cat doesn't come to our facility? So this is something I'm not tracking, and I would really like to figure out a better way to track this for the upcoming year. When people get in touch with us about lost or found pets and we are making those connections and reunifications kind of quote unquote offline, as I'd call it, the animal isn't in our facility, but we're still helping with that. So what I'll do is, say like, that sounds like this lost cat, here's that person's information, I'm going to give them your information, call the owner, say it sounds like this person has your lost cat, here's the finder's information. And then I always tell them, you can always call me back if there's some miscommunication or you're having a problem, but otherwise I'll presume that all goes well, and please let me know, because it's always nice to be involved in those situations as well. I think it's also still a win, even if the cat doesn't get quote unquote reclaimed or returned to home, if you can make contact with the owner and get information and history. So one thing to note, so we have that 36% reclaim or return to home rate. Of that, about 5% are cats that don't actually end up going back to their owners, but I still consider it a reclaim because of this. So, you know, wow. No matter how we found the owner, if we're making contact with them, every once in a while we'll make contact with an owner that is, you know, maybe the cat's been missing a really long time and they're no longer in a place to be able to take the cat back. Maybe they had been recently thinking about rehoming the pet for some other reason, and now that the cat is in our adoption center, it maybe seems like the right time to just move forward with that process. Maybe it's a cat that came to us really sick or injured, and based on our vet's recommendations, euthanasia is the most humane outcome. And so in those situations, we're basically getting the owner's consent to instead surrender the cat, or consider humane euthanasia as an outcome for the cat. So in about 5% of that 36%, it's that outcome. So the cat doesn't actually end up going back to their home, but we've made contact with the owner and given the owner information for them to make an informed decision about what then the next outcome is for that cat. And in those situations, we at least, you know, if it's a sad, you know, situation with euthanasia decision, I think, you know, it helps all of our staff feel more confident in that decision, that the owner could be informed and make that decision on their own with the information we could give them. And if it's a cat that we're going to end up adopting out, you know, then being able to get a full profile and behavior history, so we have more confidence in what kind of home would be a good fit for that cat going forward. And then, you know, do we have volunteers and people in our orb that can also be kind of look out on all those local lost and found Facebook groups, and getting in touch with us for possible matches. So another strategy in action, this is Mittens and Desaya and her boys. So Mittens is a cat that actually a finder reached out to us about. Someone said, you know, this cat's been coming around. I've been feeding her for a while. It's getting to be winter. I can't take her in. You know, I'm not really sure where she came from. And so we did, you know, what we do is, which is take a found report, take the person's information, ask her to send a photo. You know, she's described as a black and white cat, which could look like a lot of things. Mittens has some pretty specific markings on her face, as you can see. So when we got that photo of the found cat, you know, when we started looking through our lost reports, it was very immediately apparent that this was a lost cat named Mittens. So we were able to get in touch with Desaya, who's Mittens' owner, and confirmed that it was absolutely her. Desaya was very invested in her cat, had reported her lost to us, had followed up with us multiple times about her being lost. Mittens was not spayed or microchipped at the time that she got lost. Desaya actually had an appointment to bring her in, and she got lost a couple days before it. But we were able to facilitate that. So the finder was able to bring Mittens in the morning to our spay-neuter clinic, to get her spayed, and then Desaya and her boys were able to pick her up that afternoon. It was really the absolute cutest thing I've ever seen, because Desaya didn't let the boys know that Mittens had been found. She told them that their other cat had an appointment and they needed to go pick her up. So to be able to be there when the boys walked in and saw that it was Mittens and not their other cat, Dottie, was just a really wonderful, really sweet reunion to be a part of. One other thing I don't have a slide about, because it happened pretty recently, which is a good example of doing a little bit of those deep dives on those microchips. We had a cat come in with a microchip, that the phone number was a dead end. You know, that the cat wasn't found anywhere near the address on the microchip. And we did a little Googling and found what appeared to be an obituary that seemed like a match for the person on the microchip. In the obituary, next of kin was listed from the town where the cat was found. So we thought, okay, that makes sense, right? If the person passed away, then their next of kin maybe inherited the cat and now lives in that town where the cat was found. So we did a little bit of searching on that next of kin, and it turns out that person lived, you know, 1 street away from where the cat was found. So that seemed like a really, you know, a hot match. And we were able to just send someone out to the address. As soon as we pulled up to the address, there was food and water outside the door, very apparent that they were missing a cat and waiting for them to come home and hoping to open the door and have them show up. And it turned out it was exactly that situation. And again, that whole process, including like driving to the person's house, took maybe 35, 40 minutes of just, some creative outside the box thinking and getting that cat back to the people who loved her and really wanted her back. And then making sure we got that microchip updated to their contact information. So this is just a breakdown of our reclaim. So again, we got a 36% reclaim rate. And I should note that is for cats six months and over. So we're really not counting kittens under 6 months in that number, since overwhelmingly the kittens that we get in are usually, feral kittens born outside. And then this breaks down what drove, so that's numbers wise, that's 73 reunions. And this chart here on the right breaks down how those reunions came to be, which I really like looking at this. So 26 were working microchips, great. That's like the, the bread and butter, easy, no problem, check it off the list. But then if you look, 18 of those were from those social media shares. So, if we weren't utilizing that Facebook page, if those weren't being shared, we wouldn't have nearly as many reclaims. And again, anecdotally, I would say it's very often like the owner is maybe a person who is not social media savvy or computer savvy, but it's their neighbor, their son or daughter, their niece or nephew, or someone that's seeing the cat and reaching out on their behalf. The next number, 17, is also that detective work on outdated microchips. So that's a number that I'm really proud of. And again, really bumps up that reclaim rate, that 17 individual cats that got back to their owners just because we did like a little bit of work, even though that chip came back as a dead end, instead of using that as a platform to be frustrated that, people need to keep their microchip information up to date, realizing that it's one of a million things we're all asked to do and keep up to date. And folks, they never think the emergency is going to happen when it does. And so again, as the experts in our community, really making sure that we're doing our due diligence to get those lost pets back to their owners. And then there's a few, up here, just matching loss reports, cross referencing with other organizations. Sometimes with microchips, we will also, reach out to the local animal control or another animal shelter to just have them look that person up in their system and see, again, do you have more recent or updated contact information than is on this microchip? And overall, this is how we're getting lost pets back to their owners. So I think we're just about time.
So one question was going back to that story where someone had put a trap out for 45 days. When you give people traps to set, do you have them check the traps throughout the night?
Yeah, we're giving them information about how to best use the trap. They're certainly not setting it like out in areas that are public. This was someone who lived in a spot that it was right on her own property, and that she was able to hear it when it went off. It was like right outside her bedroom window. So she was able to hear all those skunks and possums and raccoons for a month and a half.
Okay, I know we've talked a lot about microchips. I would like to talk a little bit about scanners. Do you have a particular scanner that you recommend, you like to use, and aren't they pretty expensive?
At the MSPCA, we have the Home Again Universal Scanner, which seems to work really well for us. There's, I think probably just like anyone, we have some older ones hanging around that are probably nearing the end of their natural lives, but we've got some newer ones that work really well and seem to, pick up any of the chips. I also highly recommend, if your organization doesn't have and has a need for also a wand scanner. In the past we were kind of held up in the process when we'd have really cranky cats come in that we felt like we couldn't get a good scan on because they were forwardly aggressive, in their space. And so now that we've got that wand scanner that we can be at a safe distance and still get a good scan on the cat, that has really helped just, speed up our process of what the best outcome is for that cat. So we're not waiting days till we feel like we can try to scan the cat. But yeah, they can be expensive for sure.
Yeah, and I do think AKC Reunite sometimes has a grant program that you can apply for funds to help at least with partially some of the scanners, but I know there is some concern over price point with regards to scanners, and
Yeah.
there's this balance to microchip to scan. You've got to, how much do you, I mean, in my dream, I'd have every library would have a scanner and people could
Mhm.
check the scanner out so that then they could, take responsibility. You could just say, hey, go to the local library and get yourself a scanner if you've got a found cat out there that seems to be friendly enough and that kind of thing.
That makes my heart swell to like 10 times its size. I hope that that can happen too. Let me know if I can help.
Will do, definitely. All right. We just have some wonder. Everybody loved the presentation. They thought it was fantastic, wonderful, great information. So everybody's beaming. There's just like lots of beaming, good stories. Yeah. And all right. Last call on questions, guys. You've just got all this love going. There's just lots of love.
Well, I'm always happy to chat and network with people. So please, please, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to talk about how we can help folks. Like I have this vision that maybe Boston can be like the return to home leader city, that we can do that. So certainly if you live anywhere, I'd love to chat. But I think, we're networking more and more in the city, and I think we're seeing the results of that.
I've got a question before we pass along here. Actually, my question is, so you're like the shelter manager. So do you have the adoption counselors doing this, or are there separate people I'm going to call them cat detectives for right now. So is it like dedicated within the adoption program staff that they kind of fit this in while they're doing their other stuff? Are you utilizing volunteer resources? Sort of how are the duties either separated or overlapping with other jobs?
Sure, yeah. So I'm not the adoption center manager, that's someone else. So I'm the operations coordinator, which means I do a whole bunch of random things. And one of those things, it was sort of a small bit of my plate when I first took on the position of managing lost and found reports, which I just saw a big need. And so I really turned that into the bulk of my job. So everyone is responsible for this, and I mentor new people, and we're all really involved and really excited about it. The majority of it is something that I'm the kind of go-to person day to day for managing that program. But again, we've got everyone on staff is on board and gets really excited about it. And basically my goal for 2020 was to really build a volunteer team around this. As we all know, 2020 has put some barriers in place, but absolutely, like, I've got more volunteers now who are entering lost and found reports, who are calling people back, providing them support, who are keeping an eye out. But I'd like to build more. My dream is that if a cat comes into the shelter, that same day we're getting volunteers out to that location to post flyers. We're doing a little bit of that, but just don't have, as many people on board to do that. So I think volunteers, of course, are absolutely a really good resource. And they're seeing those other Facebook posts and reaching out to us saying like, hey, could this be the same cat? So yeah, it's a everyone thing, but for the way we're structured, it's my kind of umbrella organization program, and then getting everyone else involved.
Oh, makes sense. I'm actually, of course, my wheels are turning and talking about, we established when the COVID started, we had the pet food task force start in Massachusetts, which was focused on just a couple of communities. And then all of a sudden it blew up until we were trying to provide pet food for cats and dogs all across the state, and became in 12 months, almost a very organized effort all across the state. So maybe there's something with this that can then go all across Massachusetts too, and in an organized effort. You have all these, you've got your 10 tools right there, your 10 tips basically, and make them into like a workbook that then different participating organizations participate in. And then, so then we're all speaking the same language, and then the general public is understanding the same language too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think for me, when you look at that graph that breaks down, that like the amount of reclaims that we're doing that are based on the social media posts and the microchip detective work, just those two things bump it up so much. And the social media posts are like really straightforward, and the community does the rest of the work. And the microchip search things, takes just a few minutes of trying to track people down. And so I think it's really worth a little bit of effort when you see the outcome.
I bet your Google Docs are pretty cool with all the Facebook lists and, the various next doors and whatever. You've probably got, good information.
I'm waiting for Nextdoor to allow us to have like a community page. I don't know if other people are struggling with this because it's so micro neighborhood specific. I think out on the West Coast, they're piloting some nonprofit pages where you can have a community page that reaches, a certain circumference. And I've reached out to them a couple times and they're still not ready for us to get on board. But I think I would be curious to see how that could bump those rates up as well.
Super. Awesome. Well, thank you so very much. This was a great presentation. I really appreciate you joining us today and also for turning your passion for cats into action. I mean, this is totally